Snow whispered against the window panes, a steady, lonely hush that made the ranch feel like an island in the middle of nowhere. Inside, Jacob was finishing another silent dinner. One plate, one chair, one echo. He'd long accepted that peace was better than pain. Until that knock, 3 sharp taps. Then a pause. Then 2 more. Hesitant, trembling. When he opened the door, 2 little girls stood there, barely 10 years old, wrapped in coats too thin for the storm. Their cheeks were red, their hair tangled, their hands clutching each other like the world might slip away if they let go. "Sir," the taller one said, voice cracking. "Mama's dying. Please save her." Jacob froze. In the orange glow of the porch light, the snowflakes looked like ashes falling between them. For a long, impossible moment, he wondered if he was dreaming, or being tested. He hadn't heard anyone call him sir in years. Not since before his wife left. Not since before the quiet turned into a way of life. He knelt down slowly. "Where is she?" "Down the road," the younger one whispered, eyes wide and wet. "She said you'd know what to do." That line, "you'd know what to do," hit him like an old memory snapping loose. He didn't know these girls, but something about the way they looked at him, the way the older one's chin trembled as she tried to stay brave, it twisted something deep inside his chest. "Do you have a name?" he asked, voice gentler now. "Ellie," said the tall one. "And this is May." Jacob glanced past them toward the darkness where the snow swallowed the road. His mind raced. How could anyone survive out there tonight? But his body had already made the decision his heart was too scared to voice. He threw on his coat, grabbed his lantern and said, "Show me." As the 3 of them stepped into the storm, the light flickered across their faces. One man's grief, 2 children's desperate hope. The night closed around them, heavy with wind and unspoken questions. And in the faint distance, somewhere beyond the snow, a weak voice was calling for help. The girls led him down the winding dirt road, their tiny footprints vanishing as fast as they appeared beneath the falling snow. The lantern's glow stretched only a few feet ahead, flickering against the wind like a fragile promise. Jacob's boots crunched in rhythm with his thoughts. Fast, uncertain, heavy. Who was this woman? Why did she send her children to me? His chest tightened with something between fear and memory. The storm reminded him of another night, years ago, when he'd failed to get his own wife to the hospital in time. "Over there," Ellie said suddenly, pointing toward a small outline by the trees. Jacob lifted the lantern higher. A broken-down wagon leaned sideways in the ditch, its wheel half buried in snow. The faint shape of a woman lay near it, motionless under a tattered blanket. He dropped to his knees, pressing 2 fingers against her neck, and there it was, faint but still beating. "She's alive," he muttered. "Barely." The younger girl, May, started crying, quiet little hiccups that tore through the wind. Jacob shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the woman. Her skin was ice, her lips pale as the snow. "She's cold through," he said, his voice rising. "We've got to move her." Ellie's voice shook. "Can you save her?" He met her eyes, the same desperate eyes that had looked up at him on his doorstep and said, "I'll try." He lifted the woman into his arms, light as driftwood. The girls trailed behind him silently, their faces ghost pale in the lantern light. When they reached the cabin, he laid her on his couch by the fire, heat creeping slowly into the room as the snowstorm howled outside. Jacob worked without thinking, checking her breathing, warming her hands, murmuring words he hadn't spoken in years. His voice cracked once when he said, "Come on, don't leave them. Not like this." The girls huddled together near the fire, watching him. Their faces glowed gold and red, eyes wide with a mix of hope and disbelief. And for a strange, aching moment, Jacob realized he wasn't just fighting for a stranger's life. He was fighting for something he'd long buried in himself. The will to care again. When the woman coughed, in a small, wet sound but real, Ellie gasped and whispered, "Mama." "She's waking up," Jacob froze. The woman's eyelids fluttered open, and her gaze found him through the haze of firelight. Her voice came out soft, almost too quiet to hear. "You kept your promise." For a heartbeat, Jacob thought he'd misheard. "Your promise?" The words pressed against something he didn't want to remember. The woman's eyes drifted shut again before he could speak. Her breathing steadied, thin but alive. He wrapped another blanket around her and turned to the girls, who were still watching him with that trembling hope only children can hold. "Get closer to the fire," he said softly. "You're freezing." Ellie obeyed, pulling May with her. Their fingers were stiff, their cheeks still blotched red from the wind. The room felt too small now. The crackle of the fire, the wet smell of melted snow, the weight of questions hanging thick in the air. He poured hot water into a cup, glanced at the woman again, then said quietly, "What's your mama's name?" "Clara," Ellie said. She used to work near the old mill before it shut down. Then she got sick." Jacob frowned. The mill. He hadn't thought about that place in years. It was where he'd once made deliveries before the accident that ended everything he'd built. "And your father?" The girls looked at each other. May spoke this time, her voice barely a whisper. "He's gone." Outside, the storm raged harder, snow battering the windows like impatient fists. The fire hissed, sending sparks up the chimney. Jacob rose and checked the door latch, feeling that old instinct kick in: protect, secure, survive. But it wasn't just the storm outside that worried him now. He stepped to the window. A faint light moved in the distance, and another lantern. Someone else was out there. Moments later, a knock, hard, not like the girls, sharp, deliberate. Jacob opened the door to find Sheriff Daniels, his coat heavy with snow. "Evening, Jacob," the sheriff said. "Heard someone saw movement down this way. You all right?" Jacob's gut tightened. Daniels had been his friend once, and before the divorce, before Jacob shut everyone out. "Fine," Jacob replied. "Just helping someone." The sheriff's eyes caught the scene inside. The woman on the couch, the children by the fire. His brow furrowed. "You sure know how to pick a quiet night for company." Jacob hesitated. "They needed help." Daniels nodded slowly, stepping closer. "That woman looks bad. You want me to call Doc Miller?" Jacob looked at Clara, then at the girls. Something about Daniels' presence, an official, watchful, made him want to say no. "No, I'll handle it." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right. But if she's in real trouble, you'd better send for help before morning." When the door shut again, the girls were staring. Ellie asked softly, "Are we safe here?" Jacob looked at them, at their frightened faces, their mother's still form, and said, "You are now." But outside, the light of the sheriff's lantern lingered far too long before it finally disappeared into the snow. By midnight, the storm softened into a whisper, the kind of silence that only follows chaos. The cabin's fire glowed steady now, the light tracing soft lines across the room. Clara's breathing had evened out, her color returning little by little. Jacob sat across from her in his worn armchair, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the flicker of the flames. He hadn't shared this space with anyone in years. The air used to feel heavy, hollow, like grief had built itself into the walls. But now, with the faint rhythm of a woman's breathing and the small sighs of two sleeping children, something old stirred. A forgotten calm. He reached for his coffee mug and found it cold. He smiled faintly at the absurdity. "I should have made cocoa." Then a voice broke the quiet. "She always said you'd come." Jacob turned. Ellie was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her sister. Her face was half in shadow, her eyes fixed on her mother. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. "Mama used to tell us stories," Ellie said, "about a man who lived alone on a hill, who helped people when no one else would. She said if we ever got lost or scared or needed saving, we should find him. She said his name was Jacob." His throat tightened. The fire popped loudly, like punctuation to her words. Jacob tried to answer, but nothing came out. That name, said with that kind of belief, it hit something deep, something tender he didn't know was still alive in him. Ellie went on, her small voice unshaken. "She said you were the reason she believed good men still exist." He swallowed hard, staring into the flames. Good men. The phrase echoed in his head like a dare. He remembered the things he'd done, the people he'd turned away, the long years of silence. "Your mama's strong," he finally said. "She just needs rest. I'll look after her tonight." Ellie nodded, then crawled closer to May, wrapping her arms around her sister. Within minutes, both were asleep again. Jacob leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, he prayed. Not with words, but with a feeling, a quiet plea that maybe he wasn't too far gone to be useful to someone again. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark, that unspoken promise to protect, would pull him into something far bigger than mercy. Outside, the wind had stopped entirely. The snow glistened under the pale moon, and deep in the woods, a faint light flickered, not from the sheriff this time, but from something else moving slowly toward the cabin. Hope, it seemed, was never born quietly, just before dawn. The light outside turned that blue-gray color that means the world is deciding whether to wake up or stay asleep. Jacob stirred the fire back to life, careful not to wake the girls. Clara still lay wrapped in blankets on the couch, her skin no longer as pale. He was about to brew more coffee when he heard it, the creak of the porch boards. He froze. The sound came again, slow, deliberate steps. Jacob reached for the rifle he kept above the mantel. The girls stirred, sensing the tension before they even opened their eyes. "Stay quiet," he whispered, lowering the lantern's flame. The door handle turned once, then stopped. Then a knock. Jacob's voice came out firm. "Who's there?" Silence. He moved closer, heart pounding. A shadow passed across the frosted window. Tall, broad-shouldered, unfamiliar. He opened the door a crack, just enough to see the figure standing in the half-light. A man soaked through, a hat pulled low. "Easy," the stranger said, hands raised. "I ain't here for trouble." Jacob kept the rifle trained on him. "Then what are you here for?" The man's eyes flicked past him toward the room's glow. For her, Jacob stiffened. Behind him, Clara coughed weakly, the sound that betrayed everything. "She's my wife," the man said quietly. Or she was. The words landed heavy, confusing. Jacob stepped outside, closing the door behind him to keep the girls from hearing. "You left her out there in that storm?" The man's jaw clenched. "Wagon wheel broke halfway to town. I went for help. When I came back, they were gone." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Your girls walked miles through that snow. They begged me to save her." The man's shoulders sagged, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Then you did what I couldn't." The two men stood in silence, the air sharp and brittle. The stranger looked exhausted, not just from the night, but from something older. "I'm not here to take her away," he said finally. "But she'll need care, more than I can give." From inside, a faint voice called, "Jacob?" Both men turned. Clara's voice was weak but clear. She'd woken, eyes wide, trembling at the sight of them both. Jacob opened the door. She stared at the stranger, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Henry," she whispered. He knelt beside her, reaching for her hand. "Clara, I thought I'd lost you." Jacob looked away, unsure where to stand. The man who had saved her and the man who had failed her, now breathing the same air. The girls woke next, confusion lighting their faces. Ellie looked from Henry to Jacob and asked the question that sliced the silence clean in half. "Mama, who's our real hero?" No one answered. The fire popped, the snow lightened outside, and Jacob realized this wasn't the ending he expected. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The morning light spilled across the cabin floor like it was hesitant to enter, thin, silver, almost sacred. The storm had passed, but the quiet it left behind carried its own kind of weight. Clara sat upright now, pale but breathing easier. Henry sat beside her, hat in his hands, shoulders bowed with the humility of a man who'd finally run out of excuses. Jacob stood near the hearth, arms crossed, watching the fire instead of them. The room was thick with unspoken things, regret, gratitude, confusion, all tangled in the same still air. "Jacob," Clara said softly, her voice raw from the cold. "They told me you came when they knocked." He nodded once, not looking up. "They were brave. You've got two strong girls." Ellie and May leaned against their mother, clinging to her hands as if they still feared she might fade away again. Clara smiled faintly at them, then turned to Jacob. "You always were the man who couldn't walk past someone in trouble." That line stopped him cold. "You say that like you know me." She hesitated, then met his gaze. And in that moment the truth came quietly, but it shook something deep. "We met once. Years ago. My husband was hurt at the mill. You helped carry him to safety before the fire spread. You didn't even wait for thanks. I never forgot your face." Jacob blinked, memory clawing its way back. The burning mill, the man pinned under debris, the woman's cry. It was her. And that same night, when the world burned behind him, his own wife had been leaving him. Fate, it seemed. Had a strange sense of timing. "I didn't do much," Jacob muttered. "You did enough," Clara said. "You gave me hope when I'd lost it. That's what I told my girls about you. Henry's voice broke through, quiet and hoarse. And now you've done it again. For all of us. Jacob looked up finally. Henry wasn't proud or defensive. He was broken, sincere, eyes wet. I don't deserve her kindness, he said. But you reminded me what it looks like. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Jacob walked to the mantel, pulled his rifle from its hook and, with deliberate care, set it down on the floor. I'm done fighting ghosts, he said quietly. Maybe it's time I start saving the living. The gesture was small, but it was everything. Clara reached out her hand. Not a plea, not a promise, just a quiet bridge between pain and forgiveness. Jacob took it, and for the first time in years, warmth rose through him that had nothing to do with fire. Outside, the sky cleared fully on soft gold over endless white. The storm had passed, but the world had shifted. The day melted slowly into pale afternoon light. The snow had turned glassy under the sun, each flake now a reflection instead of a shadow. The cabin no longer looked lonely, just lived in. Smoke curled softly from the chimney and laughter, small, hesitant, but real, rippled through the air like something fragile rediscovering its shape. Jacob stood outside by the fence, his coat open, the wind brushing through his hair. He could hear the girls inside giggling as Clara taught them to stir soup. Henry's voice joined in, awkward but tender, like a man remembering how to belong. Jacob smiled. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel like the world had ended. Clara stepped out, cheeks pink from the firelight. You're not coming in? She asked gently. He shook his head. Just needed a minute to breathe. She studied him for a long second. You've got that look, she said softly, like a man standing at the edge of something new. He laughed under his breath. Maybe I am. They stood together in silence, watching the horizon, two survivors of different storms. Clara's hand brushed his sleeve, light and unassuming. I don't know how to repay you, she said. You already did, Jacob replied. You reminded me what it feels like to be needed again. A flock of birds broke across the sky, a scatter of dark shapes against the blinding white. Jacob watched them go, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He realized then that some rescues don't happen with grand gestures or miracles. Sometimes they happen in quiet rooms, overshared warmth between broken people who choose not to stay that way. He turned to Clara. When you're ready, I'll help you rebuild. Whatever you need, she nodded, eyes glistening. And you? I'll start with fixing this fence, he said, chuckling. Seems like I've got neighbors again. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound lingered long after she'd gone back inside. Jacob looked toward the tree line, where the storm had swallowed the road the night before, and whispered, Thank you for knocking. Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances. It gives us second people who remind us we're still capable of goodness. Jacob's story isn't just about saving a stranger. It's about saving himself through compassion. If you believe kindness still has the power to rebuild what pain once destroyed, leave a in the comments. And tell me, have you ever met someone who reminded you what hope feels like?